And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Hello, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Aviation Weather Outlook on this Wednesday, May 21st, 2025. And as we head up here through the end of the week, this outlook's Thursday into Friday. We're entering the long Memorial Day weekend, kind of the kickoff unofficially of the summer season. And we have a bit of an active weather pattern. We have a couple of lows that are going to be crossing the lower Bering, Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, and that energy is going to be heading east, southeastward, and then eventually pivot back north and westward along the Gulf Coast. And that's going to tend to make the Panhandle a rainy spot for the holiday weekend, as there will be different intervals of rain, some of it moderate to locally heavy setting up. But in the meantime, we're watching a system as of this Wednesday late morning. It's coming through with some breezy conditions and rain along the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, areas around Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Bays. And that moisture is going to be there at least through the day Wednesday, and then it's going to kind of wane as the low pressure heads east-southeastward south of the Gulf. But as I said, that energy is going to kind of recollect and pull back to the north and west as we go into the weekend. Meanwhile, still IFR conditions Thursday morning along the Beaufort Sea coast into the North Slope, through the Bering Strait, Shishmaref down to Savunga, Gamble, and St. Matthew. We find some pockets of IFR, northern Panhandle, intercoastal mountains, especially Chilkoot White passes, and then IFR conditions lower half of the Alaska Peninsula and back toward the Aleutians. You can see kind of that comma shape to the IFR conditions. That is actually low pressure in a frontal system. Now, Thursday afternoon, going to be enough warming across the east central interior near the Alcan border, lower Yukon Flats, 40-mile gold country. There could be an isolated thundershower pop up there. Otherwise, for Thursday afternoon, we expect MVFR conditions along the Gulf Coast, IFR conditions north slope and along the Arctic coast, IFR St. Matthew, or I should say St. Lawrence down to Nunavik Island, and then a broad area of IFR conditions out over the Bering, extending into the eastern Aleutians and there toward the far south end of the Alaska Peninsula on Friday morning. Widespread IFR conditions, north slope, Arctic coast, Chukchi Sea going down along north side of the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence, St. Matthew, down into the Pribilovs. We should have fairly reasonable conditions of VFR across much of the mainland south of the Brooks Range, and then some MVFR conditions expected Friday morning for the Panhandle and back along the Gulf Coast to Kodiak Island. For Friday afternoon, with the daytime heating, afternoon, early evening, there could be a few isolated thunder showers popping up here across the interior, especially just on the north side there of the Alaska Range and the Yukon River. Otherwise, IFR conditions continue, likely some lower cloudiness, fog along the North Slope and along the Arctic coast through the Bering Strait. Again, St. Lawrence, St. Matthew, St. Paul. Then back to the west, we have yet another hint of a low and frontal system bringing more IFR conditions through the western half of the Aleutians. So passes Thursday, it's going to stay IFR as you fly north of Anatuvik Pass. The pass itself, MVFR across the spine there of the Brooks Range, but just on the other side, IFR across the North Slope, VFR as you fly south toward the Yukon River. Same thing, Adigan Pass, generally MVFR conditions through the pass, but the north end and flying toward the North Slope IFR, whereas if you go south, we expect VFR conditions there. Lake Clark and Merrill, in the west arm of the Alaska Range, generally MVFR conditions Thursday. Rainy Pass, MVFR as well. Windy Pass, MVFR, try to become VFR in the afternoon. And Isabel Pass should generally see VFR conditions for Thursday, as will Mentasta Pass. And Tanita Pass may start out with some MVFR conditions, especially along the west end, becoming VFR. And Portage Pass, generally through the pass and out over Prince William Sound, MVFR conditions, but we could see VFR conditions there toward and just beyond the west entrance. Up there in the far northern portion of the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White starting out Thursday morning IFR, giving way to VFR conditions. And looking at the freezing levels at the surface, we do have readings above freezing going up along, especially through the southwest and central interior along the Yukon River, and also up into the Mat-Su Valley, Anchorage Bowl, along areas just inland from the Gulf Coast. Freezing levels aloft do bump upwards to around and above 4,000 feet in the central and eastern interior. And then behind me, the frontal system, lows coming out of the far western portion of the Aleutians and Bering Sea. We find ahead of it, freezing levels rise above 6,000 and 8,000 feet through the central Aleutians, with 10,000 foot plus freezing levels aloft south of the central and eastern Aleutians. And this will obviously dictate the nature of where you're going to find the icing above what level. So we have some remnant moisture and energy with the low that's going to be passing across and just southwest of Kodiak Island. In the cooler air on the backside, we could find some moderate icing above 4,000 feet over the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim region. Out over the western Gulf above 6,000 feet, and then lower Gulf, North Pacific above 8,000 feet. And then back here toward that next low and frontal system, above 8,000 feet here, around the far eastern Aleutians and tip of the Alaska Peninsula, and then back toward the low itself above 6,000 feet out there over the lower central portion of the Bering Sea. Now the jet stream winds aloft at 30,000 feet. We find a jet core. Generally the strongest winds now are south of the Gulf, as well as extending back through the North Pacific and crossing through the central western Aleutians. There is a jet core of 155 knots with more of a northwesterly flow expected there on Thursday afternoon. And then as we bring it down to 9,000 feet or 700 millibars, again, that core of stronger winds remains south of the Gulf. And we have even a little bit of what looks to be an well, that is a low circulation there. That's from the one low. But back here, south of the Aleutians, winds in excess of 50, 60 knots in a belt of stronger mid-level winds. And then taking it down to 3,000 feet, we find circulation around that low, pulling the wind field back toward lower Cook Inlet and Kodiak Island, approaching gale force. And then a general area of 30 to 40, even 45 knot winds from south of the Gulf all the way, especially along south of the central and eastern Aleutians. So turbulence on Thursday, the most likely areas for some moderate turbulence will be here: lower Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait, the area around Lake Iliamna, Katmai, where you have any of those higher points and gaps. Surface to 4,000 feet, and then back out here along the Aleutians with that stronger, the winds aloft and riding right along the Aleutian chain. We do expect that the Aleutians could see some moderate turbulence. Surface to 3, surface to 4,000 feet on Thursday.